Namaste and welcome to the Bharat Varta podcast. Kerala is scheduled to go to the polls in May. Politically, Kerala has been largely bipolar, with power alternating between the CPIM led Left Democratic Front and the Congress led United Democratic Front. On this episode, we do a deep dive analysis of what factors could influence the results of this upcoming election. Joining me are political experts and commentators Anant Krishna Subbalakshmi and Rohit Jayaraman. Welcome, Anant and Rohit. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Anant, we'll begin with you. Could you explain the origins of this two-front politics that we normally see in Kerala?
Yeah. So, firstly, it's a pleasure to be on this podcast for the first time. Thank you for inviting me, Roshan. So, politically, the two-front politics stretches back to the 1980s. So, in the aftermath of the emergency, both the Left Democratic Front and the United Democratic Front came into being. So, it was politically a very fractious time till then in Kerala. In fact, only the previous government had actually completed its full 5-year term. And there were a lot of political instabilities and political parties switching fronts and alliances without recklessly. So after that, after the 80s, it is when politics actually stabilized with the Left Democratic Front led by the Communist Party of India Marxist and with the CPI, the Communist Party of India, the original CPI playing second fiddle, and the Congress and the IUML forming a separate alliance, the United Democratic Front. And these two fronts were basically the specter of politics for the past 30, 40 odd years in Kerala. But now, since the rise of the BJP in 2014, you can see that changing. So in the past 30 years, it was alternating governments. The left wins one election, then the UDF wins one election, then the left wins again, then the UDF wins again. So till now, that pattern has continued. The closest that any government has come so far to re-election is in 2011, when V.S. Achuthanandan was hair's breadth away, I think 2 seats or so away from winning re-election. But so that we tend to see that pattern repeating again and again. But this time around, this 2021 May election, the left has an actual shot at getting a re-elected chief minister in the form of Pinarayi Vijayan. There are a lot of ifs and buts, obviously, but Pinarayi stands to change the entire dynamic of politics the way that no other politician has for since Nayanar, when he actually formed the LDF in the 80s. So I think we are heading towards that phase because of the rise of the BJP and various social factors, as well as communal rise of communal politics. A lot of social factors and cultural factors are all coalescing around in this particular election, and it will probably mark the end of this two-front politics in a way. And you'll see a very different sort of thing heading forward, especially in the next election, probably being held in 2026. You'll see a very different form of politics, is what I think.
So, Rohit,
I'll just pitch in here, right?
Yeah,
sure.
That
if you look at Indian politics over the last 30, 40 years, now Kerala is very unique in that it's been unchanging relatively, right? I mean, if you look at every other state, what people who were relevant in the 1980s, they're not really relevant now, or even parties. Like Kerala is unique probably in that the same parties, if not individuals, who controlled things in the 1980s are still controlling in 2021 with very little change. That's not the case, definitely in Karnataka. I mean, there was no BJP there. Of course, by and large, the change is the presence of the BJP. But even there are other things, right? Like how Mamata Banerjee was, like the Trinamool Congress didn't exist in the 80s. It's a relevant factor in West Bengal. The BSP was not so relevant. It's there. You can see Lalu and Nitish as two poles of Bihar. They were both probably in one party in the 80s. So Kerala has really managed, and to a large extent, of course, this is because of the relative weakness of the BJP in the state, to be completely immune to the changes that have swept India due to all the three big things, right? Like, as Vinay Sitabdi said, Mandir, Market and Mandal. So none of the three really did anything in Kerala if you look at the broader picture. So maybe that's where things may change, as Anand mentioned, in 2021 and depending on that in 2026.
Right. So what are some other influencing factors, Rohit? And also, could you talk about some of the underlying themes of the past elections, in 2011, 2016, 2019 state elections and so on? Central elections, sorry.
Sure, Roshan. So, like, let's start with the basics, right? I mean, Anand just mentioned how the first time a government nearly came close to re-election was the government of V.S. Achuthanandan in 2011, when it was just missed it by 2 seats. What that sort of symbolized was the weakening of the Congress's social fabric in the state, right? Because, and now, of course, a lot of people don't remember some of these things also due to their own unconscious bias, I would say. But that was the first election that the Congress really fought and won, when it was its turn at power, when it had sort of got rid of K. Karunakaran, right, and his group from power, really, in the sense that it was Karunakaran who formed the UDF, who held the Congress afloat through the 70s and the 80s. And things changed in the 90s first, even under Narasimha Rao. Then when Sonia Gandhi took over the central leadership of the Congress, things really changed for Karunakaran. He formed a new party. That party spectacularly bombed. Its rather ill-conceived name didn't help matters. But leaving all of that aside, 2011 was the first election where this happened, right? And that is actually, that sort of set the trend for the last 10 years in some form. Because if you look at what the UDF is, right, the UDF in its core element, you have the Congress. The idea of the Congress, of course, is a national party. It gained support from a lot of political people. It also gained a lot of support from upper caste Hindus, primarily Nayars, right? Then you have the Muslim League, which has a name such as clearly is supported by Muslims. And you had something like various factions of the Kerala Congress, though the dominant faction traditionally was with the UDF, again supported by Christians. So it was mostly an anti-communist alliance. And once, Hindus started feeling a bit disenchanted, that's when this whole thing happened in 2011. To remember, it was V.S. Achuthanandan who first brought up the bogey of love jihad. A lot of people now sort of conveniently forget it because that doesn't fit into the current narrative, right? But that's again something that happened at that time. And when this close election result happened, obviously everything was very close, right? When you're only a 2-seat majority or a 4-seat majority, everyone's whims and fancies matter. And that's when the Muslim League started to sort of demand a greater pound of flesh. There was this whole controversy in Kerala over a 5th minister going to the Muslim League, because these fronts have been so constant for so long that even their share of spoils has been predetermined for decades, right? Like, not just how many ministries, but who gets what ministry when somebody comes to power. Like, the Muslim League always gets education in a UDF government, or the CPI always gets forest in an LDF government. Now, these things have all been like set in stone for decades. Now, the Muslim League demanded a 5th minister. That became a huge issue in Kerala. And this is when, you had the whole Anna movement, the rise of Modi at a national level, right? All of this led to greater Hindu assertion in Kerala also, and led to the rise of the BJP. So this really started manifesting itself in 2015. So Kerala, again, local body polls are very relevant, right? Unlike certain other states, because they're fought on symbols. There's not really the kind of rigging and intimidation in favor of ruling parties that you see in other states. They're by and large conducted in a fair manner, except for certain pockets. And that's where the BJP really started rising. They created this pan-Hindu coalition. They went out with, created this sort of a special purpose vehicle called the Bharat Dharma Janasena of the to ally with the Irava community, right, which is the largest Hindu community in the state. This gave the BJP around 15% vote share in 2015. That stayed in 2016. What this basically did was it took out the bottom out of the UDF, because the vast majority of these votes were people who were otherwise opposed to the left, who were voting for the UDF. And that basically made the UDF unviable in almost all the Hindu majority districts of the state, right? Like Kerala, it's held up as a paragon of secular politics in this dark era of communal injustices in India. But if you actually look at a map of Kerala and you just transpose it to a religious demography, you quite clearly see that, apart from places in Western UP, no state votes so clearly on religious lines anywhere in India. Like, if you look at the Hindu majority districts of, say, Trivandrum, Kollam, Alapi, Thrissur, Palakkad, they were all swept by the left in 2015 and 2016. Coming to that later, the 2020 local body polls. the UDF held on in what are the more minority-dominated districts, like whether it's Muslim-dominated Malappuram or predominantly Christian-dominated Ernakulam, Kottayam, etc. I'll get to some of these later, but that's how it happened. 2019, and Anand can talk more about Sabrimala, but what happened in 2019 was very interesting, right? Basically, there was a Sabrimala, and I had actually in 2016 come out with this theory that, unless Pinarayi Vijayan really messes up, he's going to rule Kerala for a long time. And Pinarayi Vijayan, interestingly, managed to mess things up with his rather bizarre handling of the Sabrimala issue. And what happened in Sabrimala was pretty straightforward, right? Like, yes, there was a lot of anger, but how it played out was quite interesting, because wherever the BJP had good candidates, a lot of that went to the BJP. Where the BJP didn't have good candidates, a lot of the vote that came to the BJP in 2016 also went back to the Congress. So that's what primarily led to the UDF really doing well in 2019. They got 19 out of 20 seats. And of course, you will of course empathize with, it'll ring a bell for you here. Kerala was one state where actually Rahul Gandhi did have a positive impact on the Congress, right? Rahul Gandhi contested from Wayanad, which was, at least to me, in the larger scheme of things, a massive blunder by him. But it definitely helped the UDF in North Kerala, right? Like, there's massive Muslim consolidation behind the UDF. And the left had spent like the better part of the last 15 years trying to woo Muslims. And that all went away in a stroke because of Rahul Gandhi descending on Wayanad. So that's what happened in 2019. 2020, what happened was basically the Sabrimala issue sort of died down. The BJP's performance normalized because neither did it have super strong candidates in local elections like it had as Suresh Gopi in Thrissur, for instance, in 2019. Neither did it have super weak candidates. So I'd say a local election that probably shows the real strength of the BJP across the state. And that again went back to hurt the UDF, right? And that's what broadly happened in 2019 and 2020. So what I would say is Kerala is in this really weird state where the BJP is obviously in no position to gain power, but it's how the BJP performs that will determine who wins. Like, there's a particular band of vote share for the BJP, I would say at a state level between, say, 13 to 18%, which is the sweet spot for the left, right? Because if it goes below that, the UDF will win. If it goes above that, because the BJP primarily attracts Hindu votes, it'll start eating into the Hindu vote of the left, because there are only so many UDF Hindus that it can gain. Like, it probably hits that ceiling and then it starts going after the left vote. So long as it remains in that sort of band, it's probably going to be quite advantageous for the left. I mean, yeah, it's entirely communal and caste-based, what I've explained, but I think that's how Kerala is actually turning out these days.
Okay. Yeah, that's fairly comprehensive, Rohit. Anand, how would you rate the performance of the Pinarayi Vijayan-led LDF government?
Yeah, so I think I have to deal with two things here. I have to deal with the performance issue, and then I think I have to deal with the whole Sabrimala debacle separately, because I think that's a whole story all in itself. So performance-wise, I will tell you as a former communist myself that, we had a lot of hopes. A lot of communists had a lot of hopes riding on the Pinarayi Vijayan government, because he was in many ways stylized as a state level Modi, as somebody who's authoritarian, somebody who's capable of doing stuff, capable of doing things, taking Kerala to the 21st century without dragging his feet. And that was the impression that he gave off. And in fact, the appointment of Geeta Gopinath in the beginning of his term in 2016, and a lot of hullabaloo around attracting investment, attracting jobs to the state, enticing NRIs to invest in the state. A lot of different. He brought up all these economic issues in the beginning, and that kind of started just petering out at the end, though, because there was pushback from the state, from the Communist Party itself, from the party itself, and from narratives inside the state. So at which point, he decided not to continue with the appointment of Geeta Gopinath. A lot of those investment issues, he started going back to the left on issues. Started hitting on welfare, started going back on, started increasing welfare issues, started not bringing up the opposing Adani's investments. etc., etc. So that's how we started off. And then, in fact, actually, in historical terms, his term has actually been quite momentous because a lot of issues happened. Just as I mentioned, there was the the floods, and those floods in 2018 and 2019 caused significant damage to a significant part of the state. In fact, I myself was caught up in it. Almost everybody felt the pain of either having some relative who lost their house or having been displaced from where they were staying. So, and I think that Pinarayi Vijayan really shone through in that moment. I don't know if broadly Rohit agrees with me, but I think Pinarayi Vijayan really showed through that moment. Like he was objectively speaking, his press conferences were a calm balm on everybody's sentiment. There was a lot of concern about whether or not food would be there. There was a lot of concern on whether or not everybody would be rescued. So that particular stretch in 2018, I think from August 15 to around September second week or so, was a crisis, a huge crisis on itself. And the government, state government, I think did exceptionally well in that phase. And I think it felt like that, this government is untouchable at that point. And it is at that point that things actually started to unravel again. And I feel like the Communist Party has this unique habit of unraveling things just when they get so good at stuff. Just when they're attracting a lot of objectively they're doing well. And it unraveled because the chief minister decided that he's going to die on the Sabarimala issue. And this is where the Sabarimala issue comes in. So the judgment came, obviously, and initially the state government initially stated that they'd be willing to go for an appeal, right? The TDB, the Travancore Devastam Board, who's basically the administrator of the temple, the chairman was willing to go for an appeal. But because of this pushback, that really created a lot of anger on the ground, significant anger on the ground that led to a lot, not just a lot of violence. It also led to a lot of massive protests across the state by Hindu women who opposed the entry of young women into the temple. So that particular issue destroyed all the goodwill that had accumulated because of the floods and probably the welfare payments, everything. That single decision that Pinarayi took, and the fact that he decided not to relent, and the fact that he did the whole women's wall drama where he enticed a significant section of this government employees and social organization to for a new renaissance, so to speak. And then the very next day, the police smuggled in 2 women into the Sanctum Sanctorum of the temple. It became a huge issue, and it, in an instant, the entire goodwill that the state government had accumulated over the past 2.5 years, till then in 2018, just evaporated. And you saw that playing out in the 2019 Lok Sabha elections in disastrous fashion for the LDF government. So they tried their very best to not bring up the Sabarimala issue, not bring it up. But the voters were, as Rohit just described, if the BJP candidate was good enough, a lot of the voters, Hindu voters, regardless of political affiliation, went and voted for the BJP. You can see it clearly in Pathanamthitta. You can even see it in constituencies that don't generally vote for the BJP, like Alappuzha. You can also see a lot of votes that were pushed on the other side to the UDF from the BJP because of the Sabarimala issue, because they wanted to vote out the LDF. In Malabar, for example, in my home constituency of Calicut, Kozhikode, a lot of the voters that traditionally vote BJP decided to vote for the Congress this time just to beat the CPM candidate, who was very popular. So that particular debacle actually defines, in many ways, this term. Because it showed the failure of the Pinarayi Vijayan government to actually pay heed to the ground level voice. And I think this is a problem that the Communist Party has as well. They're not paying heed to what the ground level party worker wants nowadays. And it's more about Pinarayi's self-image, his own hubris, his own projection of his own image. That's what he's more intent on protecting, that rather than in colloquial terms, what we say, the party's image or the party's power or the party's ability to do things. So Pinarayi Vijayan is a very different kind of communist politician. He's unlike Achuthanandan, he's unlike E.K. Nayanar. So his government is just like him, a very flawed government in that it tries to project a lot of strength, but it's not powerful enough to actually have changed anything economically or socially in the past 5 years. And that's where we bring in the COVID issue. And I think that again illustrates how mismanaged it has been. And so we all know that Kerala was performing really well up until May. And just after that, just when the NRI, the Vande Bharat mission started coming back, when NRI started returning to Kerala, it is when the entire thing unraveled. And COVID spread like wildfire, especially in the coastal areas. And the state government was very unresponsive to the needs of increasing testing or increasing hospital capacity. You can see that very clearly in Kasaragod, the northernmost district of Kerala, where health infrastructure was not improved even after multiple multiple cries of help from the district administration. Even right now, there's a significant, as you can see, I think 60% or so of the current active COVID cases is from Kerala. So completely mismanaged, completely utterly mismanaged. But still, you can see articles being published in Time, in Vogue, about the health minister being hailed as a corona slave. Okay, till May, if you call it that, great, I understand. But right now, it's insane to think that the state has dealt with the pandemic in a true fashion, and even then they are willing to actually spend crores of rupees advertising in both state newspapers and outer state newspapers, hailing the achievements of the health department. And that in a way shows this government it is intent on showing itself in a good light, putting itself in a very fashionable light, great light, even if the truth does not reflect reality. Even if the reality does not reflect what they want to project as the truth. Sorry.
Right.
I think another thing that I wanted to point out is the PSC issue. Another issue where, the state government, again, just because of Pinarayi's hubris, they decided not, they wanted to stand firm until the last second when the party said this is going to be an issue. The party secretariat voted against, told the government to change its stance. Till that moment, the state government said the PSC rank holders were wrong. So it shows there's been a transition happening in the communist government, and this Pinarayi Vijayan government shows how the party has changed from something that was projected to be the common man's party, the projected to be the party of well-being, to a very different sort of party that is intent on a very different sort of PR building and image building, and on Pinarayi's strength and image rather than on the revolution or communism, to be exact.
Right. Rohit, do you agree with what Anand's analysis of the current government is? And also maybe you could touch upon all of the various scams and stuff like that we have heard of, right? The gold scam, the job scam, solar scam, so on and so forth.
Yeah, so I think I won't go into much detail on the scams because I honestly don't follow scams very seriously. Anand here does a much better job of documenting the scams. I think he just spoke about the PSC, the job scam. I think that's what you were referring to when you called it the job scam. So I wouldn't go too much into the scams per se. I think honestly, I have a slightly different perspective to Anand on this, right? I mean, the sense that I think Anand probably knows this also. I don't think the government's obviously done a lot. Like, its COVID performance is obviously nowhere as close to what the rest of the world, for some reason, wants to think it is. I mean, the rest of the world or the rest of India also. I mean, that again has more to do with what I just mentioned in my first section on the dark age of communalism that's haunting India and how Kerala will save India. So that's more to do with other people's projection of what they want Kerala to be because it stands for something that really is of no real consequence to Keralites other than for the fact that it gives them an ego boost, which I mean, everyone likes an ego boost. But honestly, I think the government is not as disliked, I think, as what Anand put it out to be, or at least what people might think after hearing what Anand said. Because yes, it has done a lot of things wrong, right? I mean, I'm not denying that. But I don't think people care as much about a lot of these things as they do about other stuff. And there's been a lot of welfare delivery, right? So that's an easy thing for people to sort of push back on. Like, these are all real meta things. I mean, yeah, people had a problem with Sabarimala, but how relevant is it 1.5 years down the line? I think interestingly, the BJP has probably moved on from Sabarimala. It's the Congress that's really desperate to hang on to it as a political issue, and that speaks more about the Congress's problems with gaining Hindu votes in Kerala more than what I would say is a broader issue, right? Like, before the local body polls and the Congress struggling, people had sort of, no one was talking about it. Suddenly it's now become an issue. Various people are talking about it. So I think broadly, and again, I mean, I'm pretty honest about the fact that I always would vote for the left over the UDF, right? So to me, it's just a question of two evils. And I mean, I wouldn't even call the left that much of an evil, to be honest. But I think there's another perspective to how people view the government, and what Anand said is a very popular view in Kerala. I think that's also the view of the majority of the media, right? Like, at least right now, because I think they realize how the local body polls that, oh shit, something's changed in Kerala. This government might actually get re-elected. So it's the media's job also to show people that why is the government wrong, which is true, right? I mean, that's part of the role of the media. So, but I also think that a lot of people do think the government has done a lot of good work. Like, obviously it comes from your own personal, what do you think is important, right? So I don't think it's as clear-cut politically as Anand makes it out to be. I mean, there's a very easy case to be made philosophically and ideologically that this government is a disaster. But to the common man, when you compare it to previous governments, it may or may not be a disaster. And I don't think a lot of people are voting on governance. It's a very highly communalized and caste-based. It's going to be a highly communalized and caste-based election. So a lot of people may not really vote on governance. The other thing I want to mention about Pinarayi Vijayan, I think, is Pinarayi Vijayan is the first machine politician who's become a communist CM of Kerala. Right? If you look at EMS, if you look at EK Nayanar, and interestingly, if you look at Achyutanandan, because for the majority of Achyutanandan's career, he was the machine politician. But somehow, when it became that he would become the CM, he transformed into a popular leader, mass leader or something. But Pinarayi Vijayan, I would say neither has he aspired to, and he's quite obviously failed in it. He's not a mass politician. He's a machine politician. He's there because he's the leader of the Communist Party of India, Marxist. Like, nobody's voting, like, probably maybe a few people, but very few people are voting for this government because they want Pinarayi Vijayan to be the CM. He's popular because of the party and not vice versa. And it's very, very clear, right? And he is also, for whatever reason, comfortable with that. Like, maybe he has his limitations, he knows them, I don't know. But that's how it is, and that's probably why things are different with this government, right? Like, the chief minister is clearly not very well loved, but a lot of people do respect him or tolerate him. And he's okay with that. I mean, so that's a very interesting way and it also helps him that, like, the opposition really has no one who people particularly like, right? Like, no one really likes Ramesh Chennithala. He tried a lot of things. Finally, the Congress also dumped him. And I don't think, except for certain sections in the Congress, anyone seriously thinks Oommen Chandy is a mass leader or something. I mean, like, he may be the best of a bad lot in a particular. I mean, some 28%. Anand might remember this better. People wanted Shashi Tharoor to be the chief minister of Kerala or something, which was frankly a ridiculous statistic, right? I mean, like, why would you want Shashi Tharoor to be the chief minister of Kerala if you actually applied your mind to it? So that's like the guy can't even speak Malayalam. So, I mean, moving on, leaving that aside, I mean, that probably helps Pinarayi, right? If you had a charismatic leader on the other side, his own lack of charisma or lack of interest in developing a charisma would matter. But that's what it is.
So Anant, do you also share Rohit's cynicism that the voting will be based on caste demographics and so on and so forth, or are there any kind of issues that people would actually vote for above and beyond all of these things?
There are obviously narratives, but before I just like to agree with Rohit in the fact that I basically presented a negative case because I wanted to evaluate the government negatively because that's my view of it. But yes, there is a case. I mentioned the welfare issue. I think welfare-wise, this government has done spectacularly well, and that along with the sentiment that there's nobody else who's capable enough. I think the LDF has a great advantage in the coming election. Whatever I said in the previous section, I just want to add Rohit's whatever disclaimer to it, because I agree with Rohit substantially in what he said, except for the Oommen Chandy bit. I think Oommen Chandy is a mass leader in pockets, to the extent that he's more capable than Chennathala. Anyway, so
yeah, I agree with that. I mean, totally agree with that.
So coming to narratives, there are narrative issues. Just like I mentioned, Sabarimala can be one, and as Rohit mentioned, Congress has been trying to rile it up while BJP's been silent about it, because I think BJP understands that issue is played out, and it has played out. It's played out in most households, most people that you meet in the street. It's played out. The issue is done because it's gone back to litigation. So I don't think this Congress is trying to rile that up back again, but I think it won't work. Similarly, I feel that the narrative issues, such as the PSC rank holders not being appointed into jobs, that allegation can have a little bit of impact. So can the fisheries EMCC scam. But as Rohit mentioned, it's going to be communal, it's going to be on caste lines, it's going to be on religious lines. Everybody knows that. You just saw, for example, just a day ago, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, Yogi Adityanath, visited. He raised up the issue of love jihad again, to which the CPM working state secretary responded that we will never make laws targeting the minorities. Just a few days ago, the same state secretary had said that minority radicalism is a bigger issue, and I think Rohit can talk about the Muslim Christian fight. So it's going to be purely based on caste and communal lines, while these narratives will be the leash in which you can beat the government with the media can beat the government with. But I don't know how successful it will be, especially if the LDF is able to really project itself the way it is right now by projecting its welfare infrastructure. And there's been a spate of inaugurations in the past 2 weeks, spate of welfare schemes, spate of infrastructure projects, a lot of announcements, a lot of inaugurations. If they are able to play into that image really well, yeah, it is very possible that the LDF government can be re-elected, but it is close. So narrative-wise, there is an impact, but I still, as it's going to be the caste and the communal breaks in the state that's going to determine who wins at the end of the day.
Okay. So Rohit, you have spoken extensively about how the demographics will play out, right? In that sense, there's quite a lot of chatter in Kerala about how the Christians are disillusioned with the UDF due to the rising dominance of the Muslim League as such, right? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure, Ocean. So this is a very interesting thing, right? I mean, the UDF for the longest time has sort of been backed by both Christians and Muslims in very large numbers. And the most interesting part of this is that in the early part of the 2000s, and starting from say around 2005, when the CPM started making a concerted effort to woo Muslims, it's been the Christians who, by and large, solidly stayed with the UDF even in disastrous elections like 2016, 2015 local body polls. So even at that time, there was massive Christian consolidation for the UDF, and the percentage of voting Muslims who voted for the left was always considerably higher than the percentage of Christians who voted for the left. But that's so that sort of changed over the last 1 year, right? And before I go into that, I want to make a very clear disclaimer that I'm not saying that, and there's no argument that the largest number of Christians will still vote for the UDF, right? The question is really in what numbers, and is it in the same numbers as before? And more importantly, if those numbers are enough for the UDF. I mean, it's like how tomorrow like today, 90% of blacks in the US vote for Democrats, right? If 85% of blacks start voting for the Democrats actually start losing states. Now, that doesn't mean that a majority of blacks have started voting against the Democrats. That's not how it works. And where this comes over the last 1 year, right, especially after 2019 elections, the Muslim League started getting a bit assertive. And one of the most funny parts of this, of course, is huge controversy of the Hagia Sophia, right? I mean, about how the Hagia Sophia getting converted into a mosque is actually or was a live political issue in Kerala. I mean, yeah, it fits in with the pattern of how the Gulf War became an issue in Kerala, how Saddam Hussein getting hanged to death became an issue in Kerala for various reasons. But the same thing has now happened to the Hagia Sophia. The Muslim Leagues, like someone who belongs to the family who controls the Muslim League, sort of welcomed it, and then that became an issue. And that really resulted in a huge backlash from the church, right? And when I say the church, especially a Roman Catholic church, because Kerala has a lot of Christian denominations, and I don't want to spend time on what the differences between all of them are, but the largest denomination in Kerala is the Syro-Malabar Church, right, which is the Roman Catholic Church, which also has some connection with the state. I mean, there's a separate church which follows Rome in all its aspects, and I'm not getting technical here, but Syro-Malabar Church is the largest Christian denomination in Kerala, and they have been making very anti-Muslim League statements, right? Like they've been raising the issue of love jihad. Then they went on this whole thing about how the Hagia Sophia should not have been converted into a mosque. And this ties in with the whole controversy of the Kerala Congress and its position in the UDF, right? The Kerala Congress was the third largest constituent of the UDF. Its support base was primarily Roman Catholic farmers of central Kerala, right? And what's happened was when K.M. Mani died, its patriarch, the Kerala Congress was in many factions. Most of it had united in 2011 under the leadership of K.M. Mani. But now he died in 2019, and the Congress played a deeply cynical game where it essentially tried to prop up another leader, PJ Joseph, against K.M. Mani's son, when it was pretty clear that actually the popular support of the cadre of the party, and I'm stressing on the cadre of the party and its supporters, because the vast majority of, I think, people who don't vote for the Kerala Congress probably prefer PJ Joseph to K.M. Mani's son, but that's not really relevant because it depends on who's going to vote for. Like the sample set in question should be people who are actually interested in voting for the Kerala Congress. The Congress played a deeply cynical game, tried to hand over the party to PJ Joseph because, I mean, the Kerala Congress and the Congress, as the name suggests, essentially do compete for the same vote, right? So the Congress thought it's a good opportunity to finish off. At the end of the day, what's probably the longest surviving Congress splinter in India, right? I mean, Kerala Congress was formed in the 1960s. It still survives, and as I will just mention, it is still alive and kicking. And the Congress probably overestimated that. It kicked out, or rather created a series of conditions in which any self-respecting person would leave the UDF, which is what Jose K. Mani's son did with a bunch of his supporters. And the funny part here is the Congress actually managed to convince most of the leaders to stay with the other faction, right, which it was propping up. But Jose K. Mani left, and I think there was this thing that, I mean, these guys are Roman Catholic, Christian, small farmers, right? Last group of people, if you look at European Christian democracy, who would vote for a communist party. So that probably did play a role in this, that he had nowhere to go. But interestingly enough, and again, because Pinarayi Vijay is the ultimate machine politician, he was happy in getting him along in the LDF, and things played out really well for this alliance in the local body polls, right? Clearly, the church did play a silent role in backing them. There are differing reports depending on how you view the Kerala Congress as to how important this movement was in allowing the left to gain control of district panchayats in Christian-dominated districts in central Kerala, especially Kottayam. As a Kerala Congress sympathizer, I think this played a huge role. Certain other political commentators who don't like the Kerala Congress look at it the other way around. But so basically, this has created some sort of disarray, right, in the UDF between its two main support bases. That's probably why the Congress High Command sort of brought back Humman Chandi to try and, at the expense of Ramesh Channithala. Now, how this this creates a further confusion because the Congress is actually depending on Ramesh Chanitala to get back some of the Hindu votes that they lost the last time. So it's created this clearly unstable situation. And I mean, there was this Asianet news poll that came out 3 days back, which sort of looked at Christian attitudes towards the UDF, and it's came out around 40% of Christians do have issues with the UDF, which is a pretty big number actually. Like while the people who presented that program for whatever reason were trying to say, oh, see, that means there's no issue. It's not really the case because Christians have voted at the range of 65 to 70% for the UDF traditionally. Now you're seeing that's come down to 55 to 60%. That's a big issue, I would say, for the UDF, in addition to its pre-existing structural issues that I first described.
Right. So Anand, we've also witnessed a groundswell of support for the BJP, right? Driven by Prime Minister Modi's own popularity. And, Rohit touched upon, how BJP could be an influencing factor, right? I mean, that 15 to 18% vote that they can get. So what do you make of BJP's chances in this election and how that will play out?
So yeah, as Rohit mentioned, that 15 to 18% vote share, I think that 12 to 18 maybe, that percentage of vote share, if they fall within that vote share, then it's obviously advantage left, just as Rohit mentioned, because that particular vote share means that they're only they're only taking away the votes from the UDF base, which is basically Naya votes. So if you see the BJP, as he just mentioned, if you see the BJP falling below that, then it means that the Naya vote base has left the BJP and decided to stay out of the, vote out the communists. And the other way around, it means that it's started, capturing the CPM votes, which it's been trying to do for a significant amount of time. But it's failed to do. Even during the 2019 election, you still did not see a lot of those CPM Hindu votes substantially switching from the CPM to the BJP. But coming to the state's possibility of the BJP this time around, I would rate it. I would be happy personally. I mean, what do you say? If I were a BJP supporter, I would be happy if they won 2 seats and a vote share of around 15% plus, probably 18%. Because the ultimate truth is that the state unit has a lot of factionalism issues and it has a lot of narrative issues that it needs to, overcome. And the party, party has been trying to project a different image for it. You saw the entry of E. Sridharan just a few days back to the party. There was an announcement. So his entry will definitely, add narrative points to what the BJP wants to project, which is basically that it's a party of development. It's a party against minority communalism. It's a party against nepotism. And it basically, there is a plan for that. There is a lot of voters who would vote just for that, but it has a lot of narrative issues and a lot of factional issues at the ground level that it needs to overcome, which it has failed to do. So I would say that there are a few seats in, basically urban seats in Trivandrum that it can perform really well. I'm pretty sure that they'll win Nemam again, the one seat that they won last time around, O. Rajagopal, the only sole MLA of the BJP from 2016. And there are possibly a few other seats they can win, depending on how the LDF and UDF comes into an arrangement regarding how or when, who they want to, whether or not they'll be willing to cross vote in order to beat the BJP candidate. There are also, there's a lot of headway that was made in the 2019 Lok Sabha election that the BJP made in Thrissur, in Pathanamthitta, even in Alappuzha, they made significant headway. They also made headway in other places as well. So there's that opening that the BJP definitely has, and the Asianet poll that happened, that was released 2 days ago, it showed that the BJP could win up to 3 to 7 seats overall, and I think that is possible. But very realistically, the estimate should be around 2 to 5. And more important than the actual seats they win is how much vote share they get and where they get the vote share from. Because if they grow beyond a point, then it's they basically are the kingmaker in the sense that their voters, the flow of their voters, one way or the other, determine who's going to win in a given constituency. So the BJP's impact does not lie in the seats that it wins, but possibly in the voters that it sways, whether or not it sways enough voters from the CPM, or whether or not it's able to retain those Naya votes that it secured from the from the Congress. On the ground level, I can tell you that a lot of even Hindu Idava leaders, Tiya leaders have switched from the Congress to the BJP, and even Communist Party workers are trickling in to the BJP in a small but regular fashion. So you do see that issue propping up again and again, the Hindu consolidation narrative. But I do not think that it is strong enough for the BJP to actually have a performance that they will probably want, which is probably win 15 or 20 seats, which is a fool's errand. They should be happy with winning just one more than Nemam. Retaining Nemam and one more, I would rate that as BJP being ultimately very consequential. And if they win a vote share around above 18%, it is a phenomenal performance, is what I think. I don't know if Rohit agrees with me.
Rohit, same question to you. We've seen the Prime Minister inaugurate a bunch of infrastructure projects as well, right? I mean, I think he was at the Pugalur, Thrissur high voltage HVDC power transmission corridor also recently, right? And perhaps, I mean, you could also talk about the impact of E. Sridharan.
Sure, Charlie. So I think I agree with Anand in terms of the numbers and all, right? I mean, I honestly don't think the BJP in Kerala has the ability at this point to win more than that. Because one more thing people need to understand is that elections in Kerala are very individual focused, right? If you have a strong candidate who can be considered a winnable person, then a lot of people will vote for that person thinking that it's not a wasted vote. I mean, if you feel some random person, the number of votes you get will be far below your natural support, and vice versa. I mean, if you feel someone who's really strong, you can get a lot more votes than your party might think otherwise. In a way, that's not necessarily the case in other places, and that's not something that's prop. So I don't think BJP really has the firepower to field more than 6 to 8 such people, and that's where E. Sridharan comes in, right? Because the biggest thing about it is that about him coming in is the BJP is sort of stagnated in Kerala, which is why speaking as someone who is definitely a sympathizer of the BJP, the local elections were a really good performance, right? Because the BJP really had nothing going for it from, say, 2019. Sort of stagnated in the state and still put up a performance, depending on whose numbers you go by, was either equal to its best ever performance or better than its best ever performance, without anything really going for it. And that is something that means that party clearly has now achieved some sort of a floor or a base from which is around the 13 to 15% vote share mark. And that's where I think E. Sridharan comes in, because he's obviously someone who's really well respected in the state. Him joining does give a lend of sort of credibility. The fact that the party is taking it seriously, right? Like, E. Sridharan came out and said he's the chief ministerial candidate. He's ready to be the chief minister. I don't think he's in any position to be the chief minister, or the BJP in any position to form the government, but at least shows that there's someone with his credibility who's coming in saying that. I mean, it's very different when a BJP state leader says that they are ready to be chief minister and E. Sridharan says it, right? Like, because the man has a huge amount of credibility, and obviously he will definitely impact whichever seat he's contesting in. I mean, he is a winnable candidate. Everyone will think that he has a role there. So I think one more thing on this number of seats the BJP wins is, and I agree with Anand, it's going to be a very close election, right? When it's a close election, and like say 2011, if the BJP had won 5 seats in 2011, government formation would have been very interesting in Kerala, because neither front would have really got the majority. Then you can actually see how things will evolve, who will jump where. That all of those things, that's actually the ideal position for the BJP, right? Because the BJP will obviously not ally with either of these fronts. So it will become the clear opposition, and you can see some movement in between the two. So I would say that anywhere between 2 to 5 seats where sort of no front can get a majority on its own would be a good position for the BJP to win.
Right. Okay. To close this podcast out, final question to the both of you. Who's coming back to power, and what will the final arithmetic look like? Maybe we can start with you, Anant, and then we can close with Rohit.
I'll present not a realistic scenario. I'll present my dream scenario. just as Rohit mentioned, you want that situation where, as a BJP sympathizer myself also, I'd like to, present a scenario where the BJP gains the most. And that is a scenario where, just as Rohit mentioned, they win and I mentioned they win 5 seats or 6 seats, and it's a very close election, which means that neither front has a ruling majority of 71 or 72. At which point, either of the two backup parties, the second parties in either of the front, which is the Muslim League in the case of the UDF or the CPI in the case of the LDF, they will be enticed. Even the small factional parties obviously will also be enticed to switch alliances in one way or the other to form a government. At which point the BJP can gain a significant amount of credibility in the sense that the other party, whoever's losing out, which is most probably going to be the Congress in an election, because I think there's been this long dance that is going on between the Communist Party and the Muslim League since the 80s, where they pretend whether they pretend it's a communal party, whether they pretend it's not a communal party, and there was a huge there was a communist leader who wanted the Muslim League to ally with the Communist Party, and he was thrown out. So I think there's this huge dalliance that's been going on for the past 20-30 years since the two-front politics began between the CPM and the Muslim League. And I want the Muslim League to switch off to the CPM, and that would be the scenario that I would want. But I think realistically, it is very possible that Pinarayi Vijayan will be re-elected. Because I don't see a viable CM candidate from the UDF. Oommen Chandy or Ramesh Chandra. Oommen Chandy is too sick, and his image is not that it's not that great because of the corruption scandals, etc., etc. So I think Pinarayi Vijayan will most likely come back to power, and hopefully with Muslim League support. That's my dream scenario. So.
Rohit, your thoughts?
I think I would bet on the LDF coming back to par with, say, around 75 to 83 seats. I think the UDF will gain in North Kerala. The UDF will definitely gain a few seats in Malabar, primarily due to Muslim consolidation in favor rather of the UDF. I think the BJP will probably get 1 or 2 seats, not more than that. I agree with Anand that they'll probably win in Neman. That's about it. I think the more interesting thing will be what happens if this comes out, like if this plays out as I think it will, in terms of how much more will the bottom slip out of the Congress, and that's where I think it will. Though I don't think there's any chance at all of the CPI at least moving away from the left. And I think even the numbers will be enough that I don't think the Muslim League will ever have to make some sort of a choice. If at all there's a numbers, the LDF will be short of numbers. It will probably be 3 to 4. In which case they can always get enough of random. I mean, the RSP is always available. At the end of the day, they are a left party. And various other characters will be available who can be enticed if required. But I don't think that'll be required. I think, honestly, that Pinarayi should come back though with a slightly reduced majority.
Right. And maybe quick thoughts on, what will happen if that, indeed becomes a reality? I mean, any impact as such?
I think that will, some extent, depend on the national scene, right? I mean, if the BJP continues to be in the same preponderant scenario it is today nationally, at some point the Congress will start slipping in Kerala if it loses the 2021 elections. So by the time you can see the 2026 elections, I think things will be quite different if Pinarayi comes back in 2021 and Prime Minister Modi wins re-election in 2024 with the Congress in the same sorry state nationally as it is today, then I think things will really start changing in Kerala.
All right. Thank you so much, Rohit. Thank you, Anand, for your fascinating insights. I mean, this was really interesting analysis. As such, maybe we should do a follow-up closer to the elections. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roshan.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharat Varta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharat Varta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media. We are at Bharat Varta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You could also get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvarta.in. The links are in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.